The dust settled across the Aegean. The fires of war, which had consumed the Greek world for decades, had finally been extinguished. The mighty Persian Empire, an unstoppable force that had humbled nations, had been repelled. Twice. The Greeks had achieved the impossible. They had saved their way of life, their freedom, their fledgling democracy. But victory, as history so often proves, can be a fragile thing. For the Greeks, it wasn't the end of a long struggle. It was merely the beginning of a new one. A war not against a foreign empire, but against themselves. This is the story of how the heroes of yesterday became the rivals of tomorrow. This is the story of the uneasy peace that followed the Persian Wars, and the slow, inexorable march towards the conflict that would tear the Greek world apart. This is the story of the road to the Peloponnesian War. The year is 479 BC. The Battle of Plataea is over. Xerxes' grand invasion is a humiliating failure. The city-states of Greece, united in their fight for survival, stand on the precipice of a new golden age. Athens, the naval power that delivered the decisive blow at Salamis, basked in a unique and brilliant glory. Sparta, the Stoic land power, was celebrated for its unwavering courage at Thermopylae and its decisive victory at Plataea. Together, they had formed the core of the Hellenic League, a coalition forged in the fires of necessity. But as the immediate threat vanished, so too did the unity. The shared purpose that had held the Greek world together evaporated, replaced by old rivalries and deep-seated suspicion. The first point of friction was a matter of stones and walls. The citizens of Athens, returning to a city reduced to rubble, began a massive rebuilding project. The city walls, deliberately left in ruins by the Persians to prevent their use as a fortress, were a top priority. But other city-states, particularly Sparta, grew instantly wary. A walled Athens was a strong Athens, and a strong Athens was a potential rival. Spartan envoys were quickly dispatched to Athens, urging the Athenians to abandon the project. They claimed that such fortifications would only serve as a stronghold for any future invader, and would be better left down for the safety of all Greeks. The shrewd Athenian statesman Themistocles saw through this pretext. He knew the Spartans feared Athens' growing power, not a hypothetical future invasion. To stall them, he traveled to Sparta himself, sending his co-envoys to secretly manage the wall's construction. While Themistocles engaged the Spartans in lengthy, drawn-out debates, the Athenian people, men, women, and children, toiled day and night, using every available piece of stone, even grave markers, to rebuild the walls. By the time the truth was revealed, the fortifications were high enough to be defensible. Themistocles famously argued that a city's strength lay not in its walls of stone, but in its ships and its men. The Spartans, outmaneuvered and humiliated, had no choice but to accept it. This act, small as it may seem, was a powerful sign. It showed that Athens was no longer a junior partner. It was an equal. And it was a signal that trust, once a cornerstone of the alliance, was beginning to erode. The years that followed saw the creation of two rival power blocks. Athens, utilizing its immense naval superiority, established the Delian League in 478 BC. Its stated purpose was to continue the fight against Persia, to protect the Ionian Greeks, and to gather a war fund. Member states, numbering over 150, contributed either ships or, more commonly, money. But over time, the League began to change. When the island of Naxos tried to secede from the League around 470 BC, Athens crushed the rebellion and forced it back into the alliance. A few years later, the powerful island of Thasos made a similar attempt. The Athenians laid siege to their city for 2 years, and when it finally fell, Thasos was stripped of its walls and fleet. Athens was showing its hand. The League's treasury, once held on the neutral island of Delos, was moved to Athens itself in 454 BC. This move solidified Athenian control and signaled the League's true nature. The money intended for defense was now being used to fund Athens' magnificent building projects, including the Parthenon. The Delian League was an empire in all but name. Meanwhile, Sparta solidified its own power base. It was the head of the Peloponnesian League, an older and more traditional alliance based on land power. The members were bound by military treaties and a shared interest in maintaining the status quo. Unlike the Athenian Empire, this was not a system of tribute. The Spartan system was focused on mutual defense and political stability, ensuring that no single member, aside from Sparta, could become too powerful. So, by the mid-5th century BC, Greece was a two-player game. The maritime, democratic, and culturally vibrant Athenian Empire versus the land-based, oligarchic, and militarily conservative Peloponnesian League. It was a clash of two diametrically opposed ideologies. The first major crisis came with a devastating natural disaster. In 464 BC, a massive earthquake struck Sparta, causing immense destruction and loss of life. It was one of the worst earthquakes in Greek history. The Helots, the enslaved Messenian population who vastly outnumbered the Spartans, saw this as an opportunity for rebellion. They rose up against their Spartan masters, taking refuge on the fortified mountain of Ithome. The Spartans, facing a grave internal threat, were forced to ask their allies for help. The Athenians, despite the growing tension, sent a contingent of troops led by the statesman Cimon. Cimon was a known admirer of Sparta, and he believed this gesture would mend the frayed alliance. However, once the Athenian forces arrived, the Spartans grew suspicious, perhaps fearing that the Athenians, with their democratic ideals, would sympathize with the rebels, or simply mistrusting a force of Athenian soldiers within their territory. The Spartans sent the Athenian troops away, and only the Athenians. This public and humiliating rejection was a profound insult. The Athenian assembly, furious, immediately voted to break their alliance with Sparta. The chasm between the two city-states was now public and permanent. This series of escalating tensions, the rebuilding of Athens' walls, the formation of two opposing leagues, and the bitter fallout from the Helot revolt, created an environment ripe for conflict. The fragile peace was now hanging by a thread. The Greek world was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The alliances were forged, the grudges were nursed, and the old order was gone. The peace of the Greek world was a myth. The road was now paved. The next steps would lead them straight to war. If you want to witness the next chapter of this epic conflict, subscribe to Legends of War and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next video.